Hey folks, welcome to Spark Q&A, where I respond to your questions about innovation and navigating complexity. This question comes from Firecrow Silver Knight and was in response to a post where I invited questions, and for the one that I selected, the poster would get a copy of Dan Ward's Punk. I happened to get two copies and wanted to make sure somebody else got one, so I want to thank Firecrow for responding to this. And again, thanks to Dan Ward for such a great book. So I appreciate Firecrow's curiosity and perspective and really want to thank him for the question. Firecrow is the creator of Compare Basic. His podcast is Mondays on a Tuesday. And I'll link to the podcast, his website, and his LinkedIn profile in the description of this video. So here's his question. What happened this last decade in terms of supporting change to supporting convention? We went from championing innovation to championing rules in tech. Words like composable and expressive have been replaced by best practice and safety. Throwing in the air quotes there because he had those quotes in there. Psychological safety, memory, type safety. It seems like the optimism from the 90s, where access to information was the great democratizer, gave way to a panicking overwhelm, where people talk more about time away from screens and cutting back from their subscriptions. Is this a sign of complexity or of a new recognition of the value of consistency? He then added his punk cred went away when he stopped spiking his hair up in a double mohawk in the late 90s, and then said that maybe he should lighten up. So what happened this last decade? Firecrow, this is a great question. I appreciate both the depth and the humor, as always with our conversations. The Mohawk line made me smile, and it's doing real work. You're pointing out a cultural shift, not just a technical one. You're noticing that we went from championing innovation, expressiveness, and composability to championing rules, best practices, and safety. You're asking whether that shift reflects complexity or a new appreciation for consistency. I think your instinct is right, but I also think the arc is longer, deeper, and more unsettling than just the last decade. While I think good processes and frameworks are incredibly useful, I almost always have a negative reaction to the term best practices for two reasons. One, when it comes to complexity, there are no best practices, only emerging ones. And two, most times I've seen people use best practices to really highlight folklore. It's how we've always done it. Not that the practice itself is best, or that they are even interested in finding out anything better. So best practice to me seems to be code that we're not really trying to think about anything anymore. And so want to dig into this a little bit more. And I would say that we didn't become safer over the last few decades. We became less adaptive by over-indexing on speed and false certainty at the expense of learning. So what happened wasn't the death of innovation. What happened was the rise of risk aversion and self-preservation, often disguised as safety. If we zoom out, this pattern didn't start 10 years ago, unfortunately. Research like this in the book Abundance by Klein and Thompson shows that many institutions, especially in the US, began slowing down and becoming less innovative decades earlier. The last decade simply made the shift more visible and more personal. At the human level, something subtle but powerful changed. We became less willing to say, I don't know, less willing to be visibly curious, less willing to run real experiments where failure was possible and public. Safety became a proxy for competence. Now, to be clear, safety itself isn't bad. Psychological safety matters. Creating space for people to bring their full and best selves to work really matters. However, there's a tension we don't talk about enough. The vulnerability required for curiosity and learning is often at odds with organizational cultures that still punish failure. So, psychological safety can become performative. It looks safe, but it doesn't always support learning. And here's my provocative claim. I don't think we're actually safer. I just think we're simply less adaptive. Safety without learning is stagnation, and closed systems rarely succeed over time. One place that you can see this clearly is Agile practices that don't necessarily follow the Agile manifesto. They're simply encouraging speed. So Firecrow, your time lines up with widespread adoption of Agile, but in practice, many organizations didn't adopt learning. They adopted an addiction to speed. They optimized for moving faster, not for better learning and insights. And in my perspective, precision and accuracy really matter here. Velocity isn't just speed. Velocity is speed plus accuracy. Over the last decade, we lost accuracy while over-indexing on speed. It's like a pitcher who can throw a 100-mile-per-hour fastball but can't hit the strike zone, or a gunfighter who can draw fast but can't hit the target. It's impressive motion, it's poor outcomes. Another flavor of this in the product space is MVP. Instead of really what's most valuable, we started shipping what's easiest to ship, what's easiest to produce. This connects to one of Annie Duke's most useful metaphors, the monkey and the pedestal. It's also known as the reverse salient. The real product isn't the pedestal, it's the monkey standing on it juggling chainsaws. But because finding and training the monkey is hard, let alone one that will stand on a pedestal for your team, the teams choose to ship the pedestal instead. It's easier, it ships faster, but without the hard part, there's no real value. I'd pay to see the monkey. I'm not going to pay to stare at a pedestal. So in a speed and MVP culture, we too often ship pedestals. Layered on top of that is another familiar bias. If we already know the outcome of an experiment, it isn't an experiment. We tend to look for evidence that confirms what we already believe, instead of information that might change, or might change our mind. This gets amplified because the world didn't get simpler. It got more interconnected, more nonlinear, more complex, but complexity doesn't announce itself. So leaders keep trying to treat complex problems if they're merely complicated or worse, simple, searching for best practices and guarantees that don't exist. Along the way, we stopped rewarding continuous learning as a capability. What we did reward was a false sense of certainty, confidence without evidence, answers without understanding, and motion without direction. A toxic combination of ignorance and arrogance. It's like the old story of the coach who asked his player, "Is it ignorance or arrogance with you?" And the player simply responds, "I don't know, and I don't care." Which brings me back to punk, both Dan Ward's book and the ethos of a cultural movement. So early punk wasn't about the look, although spiked hair, leather jackets, and other street styles became a visual shorthand for punk. It was about challenging systems with limited resources, the DIY, do-it-yourself ethos. Constraint-driven, purposeful. Over time, though, punk got sanitized. Still looked punk, but the ethos faded. Innovation went through something similar. We went from the MC5, the Clash, Richard Hell, the Damned, to Blink 182. We have innovation labs, innovation language, innovation theater, really the Blink 182 of innovation. It looks like innovation, but often without real risk, real learning, or real consequences. It looks innovative, but it simply isn't innovation. That's why I often come back to Dan Ward's work, including Punk, which you'll get a copy of, and Fire. Real innovation isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, disciplined experience aligned with strategy, delivered by teams, not the individual genius, who continue to learn and gain insights to benefit the organization and its stakeholders. Now, stakeholders, not shareholders. So we want to make sure that we have a broader perspective of who this is going to impact. So Dan Ward talks about novelty with impact, and I talk about creating and capturing new value. We're doing that for our stakeholders, both internally and externally. And again, it's not in a lone genius. It's not in breakthrough theater. We're not going to beanbag chair or razor scooter our way to new value. But in teams willing to fall in love with the problem, prototype to learn, and stay open longer than feels comfortable, innovation didn't disappear. It got quieter, more constrained, and in many ways more demanding. So yes, something changed. The optimism of the 90s gave way to overwhelm, not because optimism was wrong, but because we understand complexity and we underestimated complexity and overestimated our tools. I'll leave everybody with this reflection. Where have you traded learning for a false sense of certainty? Where are you moving fast but missing the target? And where could you run a small, honest experiment where you don't already know the answer? So Firecrow, thank you for the question. I'll get you your copy of Punk. Looking forward to see you again sometime in Iowa City. And for everyone else, if you've got a question like this, drop it in the comments or message me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much, and best of luck with your return to innovation. Take care.